is all about the staffing industry and staffing technology. Our panelists are Hope Bradford, Senior Director of Digital Transformation with Kelly, and David Francis, Vice President of Research and Product at Talent Tech Labs. I'm excited to have the two of you on here because first of all, you're going to have to talk. Obviously, all of a sudden my voice goes. But so this is 3/4 of the technology panel for the American Staffing Association conference, Staffing World. And Jim Essy, unfortunately, couldn't be with us. He's actually on a plane, so he couldn't make it. But I'm glad to have Hope and David here. So Hope, give us just a little bit of your background.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I've been over 25 years in staffing now, and primarily in the IT space, the technology space, and spent 5 years in the business. I pride myself on being the decoder many times for the technology side. I have a large team, I would consider a large team, of anywhere from business analysts to testers to developers across the organization and across the globe. We buy technology, we build technology. I have the lovely experience of working for Kelly, so we have that capability to buy and build, and we've got a lot of activities going. So I get to dabble across the technology spectrum and buy large technology and even dabble in the small technology space. So it makes it fun and interesting all at the same time, and also scary and demanding. I've got a lot of demanding business partners, and hopefully some are on the phone and they're not offended at that. They always put the challenge to the test and keep me busy, but nonetheless, it's very, I've enjoyed my time at Kelly, and it's been a fun and interesting ride.
Great. Thanks, Hope. Demanding partners and clients always just make you better. So
only a few battle scars to show for it too,
exactly.
Right? That's right. David, how about you?
I'll ask you.
Great to meet you all. Thanks, Tom, for having me on. My name is Dave Francis, based in Palo Alto, California. It's a little bit south of San Francisco. Talent Tech Labs, we're a research and advisory company. I guess I'm about a decade in the staffing industry. I actually started my career in staffing at Staffing Industry Analysts I started as like a junior analyst there, and eventually built out a technology practice. Joined Talent Tech Labs in 2019 to build out a research function here. So our business, we're a research and advisory company focused on recruiting and talent technology specifically. Interestingly enough, kind of fun fact, we were actually born out of a staffing company. So one of our co-founders was the chief operating officer for Mitchell Martin, which is a mid-size IT staffing company. They were struggling to implement different onboarding tools and other kinds of technology that they're trying to be cutting edge. And so had a really kind of forward-thinking founder, Gene Holtzman, who said, well, why don't we kind of dedicate a little incubator and figure out what all the technologies are and kind of where the reality meets the hype, and see if we can cut through some of that noise. So actually, Talent Tech Lab started as an incubator inside of Mitchell Martin, eventually grew, and now about half of our business, we're advising large corporate clients, and the other half is advising staffing companies on their technology stack and use.
Yeah, so thank you both for.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just thank you both for that. I think you bring a wealth of knowledge in two different perspectives, and then my background, I'm working with staffing and recruiting companies all day long, every day. And so technology is a huge part of that. So it's something that I'm constantly talking about and constantly looking at, what are some of the great new technologies that are out there, and how do we be more productive? How do we scale with technology? And it leads us into my first question. And by the way, before I get into the question, for those of you that are listening to the podcast here, feel free to put questions into the Q&A. We'd love to answer questions. I think that's the most fun part of this, is that this isn't about just asking a bunch of scripted questions. I got questions, but we'd rather answer the questions that you're all asking about. So I'll be monitoring the Q&A as you have the questions, and we'll be bringing it up to the whole panel for us to discuss. So Starting out, what, on a very general question, what's some of the best staffing technology that the staffing firms are using out there? What are you seeing at kind of a high level? Just, I guess, what is the difference between what some of the more progressive staffing firms are with technology, what they're using, and maybe what the rest of the industry is using? Hope if you want to start off.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the staffing firms, they're really looking at, of course, they've been using applicant tracking systems for years. Those have been around. But I think where the separation is really happening right now is those that are incorporating the machine learning. And, there, a lot of them are incorporating AI, and I'll use that AI. There's a various degree of AI incorporated in the ATS tools. But those that are really finding the secret sauce of being able to scan the databases and really pull those talent records out. A lot of us have a lot of talent records. And for those consulting firms, and even for ourselves that have a large database, we've got a lot of talent records. It's finding them and finding them quickly. It's not for the lack of records or talent out there. It's finding them quickly and finding those matches. The other piece is finding those matches and refreshing that data. So we may have found Tom out there when you were young and maybe in an internship or something like that. But it's really finding what you're doing now. Maybe you're an engineer that we could place in another situation, and finding that information and finding that out quickly and getting the jump on that is what we really need. And I think that's where the separation is really happening with a lot of the tools that we're seeing.
Yeah, I tell staffing companies all the time that the difference between you and a company starting up today is your database. And yet in so many cases, we just don't pay any attention to it. It's like we value these applicants that are coming through the door and, oh, they're the greatest thing in the world. And if we don't place them 2 days later, we don't think about them anymore. And it's almost like they're falling off a cliff or something into our database.
Right.
So yeah, it's a
Right.
great point. Yeah.
Well,
Which I
and
think is
being able to create those talent pools and nurturing those talent pools. And I really think that's where people are going to capitalize as well. And, the war on talent is real. And I think that's where people are going to focus more and more.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little bit of a travesty.
David?
That's the if somebody's letting folks, if they're forgetting about them 2 days after they apply because they didn't get placed. But I think that unfortunately probably is the standard. Yeah. So first and foremost, I guess I'll just say, maybe counterintuitively coming from a firm that's focused on technology in staffing. One just observation I've made is there's a lot of really kind of highly performing organizations that just have a really great process and culture. And so regardless of how great, technology is, and it is extremely important, it is great. The technology isn't something you can go out, like there isn't a tool that's going to go out there and, fix a broken culture or fix a broken process. And so, if you kind of weigh relatively the two, culture and process, probably number one, and then two, your technology should really be supporting that and making you more efficient and, having basically supercharging your great culture already. So with that out of the way, I guess so Hope already mentioned the applicant tracking system. So I think having a good, call it system of record is obviously core. You need basically a good sourcing portfolio. And so for a lot of staffing companies, that's just like a collection of job boards that they've decided to do business with. A lot of times there hasn't been a ton of thought into kind of what that collection of job boards is or why. And so there's usually some room for improvement and innovation there. There's an engagement layer, which is really important. And in particular, maybe the bigger opportunity as I call out, line with what Hope said, is matching and rediscovery. And so, for a lot of firms, once you get to a certain kind of collection record level or a certain, number of candidates that are in your database, being able to surface those, resurface those, and refresh the data, basically it becomes a channel unto itself, right? And so the strategy for most, or for many firms, should be, how can we move spend away from job boards, or the flow of applicants away from job boards and towards rediscovering talent that we already have, basically turning our database into an internal search engine. Sales obviously important, and then obviously you need kind of middle and back office technology. So that's kind of the core. Where the focus needs to be kind of depends on the organization. Staffing companies come in all shapes and sizes, and depends kind of on the occupational specialty you're in, but those are the core areas that you need to have at least buttoned up. And I'd say importantly, a differentiating factor is just the ability to kind of see the whole, kind of see the forest for the trees, so to speak. And so, what happens at a lot of organizations, corporate and staffing, is, getting data kind of across or holistically across, all these different systems is really difficult, getting kind of core reporting down. And so, yeah, having kind of a holistic process, basically your technology all talk to each other. Particularly the bigger you get, the harder it gets.
And it all starts with the ATS.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see when I work with a lot of staffing companies is they're trying to introduce these new technologies, but they don't have even the basic fundamentals of their ATS nailed down. And in a lot of cases, we hear this pushback of, well, our data is not any good. Well, but adding on that candidate engagement software, that mobile app, or the sourcing automation or things like that isn't going to help with your data getting any better. So, and that's one of the areas that I see that you got to get the basic fundamentals down, which is the ATS, right? That's the core system. It's, like you said, the system of record.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely say that. And I think also, streamlining your engagement activities. Yeah, I think that's a key point. And, making those meaningful moments. I think that's one of the things that I've seen over and over again, where people are trying to message out to the talent. We've got activities going where they're messaging in certain avenues and certain methodology or methods, and it sometimes is convoluted, I think, in many areas. And you're right, they're snapping on different technologies to do that, but they really need to focus on the process too. And I think that's some of the areas that sometimes gets forgotten with the technology, is the process that they're trying to enable. And so whether they're refreshing the data, searching for the data, what have you, I think they need to rediscover and get the process and, refocus on the process. David talked about the data and really, pushing the data and collecting the data. The analytics is still important. So the ATS is still the front end and maybe the system of record, but looking at the data and how you're using that data and the outcome and collecting that data, regardless of all the snap-on tools that you have, I think is also that in the way you can actually see if your engine is working. So a lot of tools are out there. We're going to Staffing World in a couple of weeks, and we're going to see all the different tools and be able to see all the cool, shiny objects. But it's like, if they're all going to be separate engines and not connected all together, and you're not going to be seeing how they're interacting with each other, and you're not going to have one system that they're flowing into so you can see all the interactions, how do you analyze that data to see how things are effective? I think that's where a lot of things fall short. And I think that's where we struggle, and it's hard to do, mapping all that data through, from the ATS to all of these niche systems down to how do you use that data and how do you interpret it? I think that's what we struggle with. A lot of people want to buy all the shiny coins, but they don't look at the connection between those.
Yeah, and just having visibility to the data opens up all sorts of things. It really, what we see is that when you start to see the data and you're collecting the right types of data. So on the recruiting side, you're collecting how many candidate conversations, how many submittals, how many new starts, how much gross profit is generated. And on the sales side, you're doing sales activities and appointments and pipeline and gross profit. And you start to measure those. the more you have visibility, the more there is visibility. And what I mean by that is you start to go, wow, now I can look at this. I see the numbers, but now I can really start to dissect it, right? And I can start to actually do something with it. And then I can start to look at ratios, and then I can start to do something with that. And then it goes back to what David was talking about, which is the people in the process. And we can start to really leverage that technology to have more insight into what the organization's doing.
And some people may say, well, I can't integrate. I can't afford to integrate all these niche systems. You know, that could be another problem. I have the ATS system, but I want to buy these separate systems. But you at least have to, like you said, Tom, look at the data or at least the output of these systems that you're using and compare it to what your other systems are doing to see if they're effective. Otherwise, what's the purpose?
Right.
So I think there's some thought that you have to put into that, at least at some point.
Yeah. Well, and I am sure that some people are thinking about, how do I get visibility to that data? Because maybe their ATS doesn't have the reporting. So, you know, what could be some ways that they are able to get that data? David, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's well, it depends on kind of what ATS you're in. I guess the most ATS systems, is kind of part of their core, are going to have some type of basic reporting. A lot of staffing companies are on, you know, they're kind of, it's not their full back office, but they're basically Microsoft shops, and Microsoft has pretty powerful reporting tools. And so you don't need to be a coder to build a pretty decent dashboard. To, you know, you're basically going to plug in those systems or those data points, and then have an analyst create the dashboards that you're looking to get in, you know, in Microsoft Dynamics. There's some off-the-shelf tools. So, you know, Bullhorn acquired a company that does kind of frontline analytics. You purchase that separately. So if you're on Bullhorn, you've got that option. Aviante has its own proprietary analytics suite. There's a tool, the name's eluding me right off the top of my head, but there's a tool that basically is designed to be, it is a Dynamics-based analytics tool, but it's designed to just be like put on top of kind of any different staffing applicant tracking system, as kind of a, you know, pre-built analytics portal. I can look that up if you're, I'll just look that up real quick. Share that with everybody if it's interesting.
Yeah. I think the key is to take a look. Oh, go
but
ahead.
in essence, but in essence, you should be able to extract, and that should be one of the things that you're asking these providers. Typically, you can extract some type of data out of these systems, and then, if nothing else, import it into an Excel or some database where you can compile and pivot tables, and at least establish some basic measures that you're trying to track upon implementation, and do some comparisons, just to see how you're measuring. At least establish some guidelines at the beginning.
Yeah, I think the important thing is
that particular tool, David, would be cool to understand.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that when we're looking at data and dashboards and reports, you look at your ATS first, and then you look at third-party integrations that are native integrations with it, so marketplace partners or whatever. And then you can also look at ways for you to get the data from the ATS in other ways, and have a third-party tool that's maybe not connected, but the data can go through. So there's different ways that people can get that data, even if the ATS doesn't have a really robust business analytics tool integrated into the system, right? And that data is critical. So let me ask another question. What emerging technologies are we seeing coming down the pike that we should be aware of?
And want me to jump in there?
Well,
go ahead, Hope.
Yeah, you want to go first? Go for it.
All right. So I guess first of all, another kind of caveat I'll say. So we're, track. I don't know if anybody has seen kind of our big, infographic with all the bubbles on there. But, we're tracking something around 58 kind of subverticals or categories of technology. And if you double click kind of into each and any one of those, innovation kind of never really stops. And so, across the kind of whole spectrum, there's innovation happening all over the place. That's in broad strokes. Where are maybe some of the more interesting, areas of innovation? First of all, the elephant in the room is everything that's happening around generative AI and large language models and all of the opportunities that are available, or possibilities that are going to be available as a result of those. So innovation or technology innovation kind of happens in two ways. First is either there's some fundamental like breakthrough in technological capabilities where we invented something new or we discovered something new, and then the second one is some of that innovation basically boils its way, something that already happened. It's like, call it business process innovation, where something that we've already discovered or has already been modeled in some other industry makes its way into the staffing industry. So like candidate engagement software is a good example of the second, right? Like that had Salesforce came around and invented this category where you're going to engage your customers. Eventually that got, kind of repackaged into a model where, you can use texting technology and, sequencing to engage candidates and tag them a certain way to do talent pooling and stuff like that, right? With Gen AI, it was a kind of a fundamental breakthrough. So we invented something new. All the use cases aren't in market yet, but what's crazy is like how fast they're coming to market, how fast, and it's kind of a function of this technology. It's really kind of a democratizing piece of software. So, you've got a model that you can very easily apply to, doing things like conversational screening, an invite to apply, matching. It's really good at kind of data extraction, assessment building and assessment, using. And so, the possibilities are kind of endless here. And we're just seeing like the first applications, right now. But in terms of like where potential impact is going to happen, like this is my hypothesis is this is like is as big as like the advent of the internet, essentially, in terms of long-term business impact. Some other interesting areas are there's a whole suite of what I call API based tools. And basically what that means, an API, application programming interface, it just means that it's kind of the way technology talks to each other. But what these tools let companies do, and staffing companies in particular do, is if you want to basically build your own solution for some kind of category that's important, you basically can do that in your own way. And it makes it very easy to build those without having to do it from scratch. So a couple examples are, like Onboarded for onboarding, they've got an API where if you want to build your own custom onboarding solution and brand it with your own, as XYZ staffing company onboarding, you've got a back end that will do all the things that you needed to do. Same thing with like payroll. There's a company called Zeal where it's an API based payroll solution. And so, if you want to build, a payroll front end and start selling a payroll service, you can basically do that. That's really cool. Basically lets organizations build kind of their own custom solutions without, with having the whole back end of that taken care of already.
David, is that similar to the codeless apps that we're seeing more and more of?
Yeah, it's similar to codeless apps. I mean, there might be some code. If you're building an application, there's going to be some code, but it goes from, needing to build all the code to needing to build like, maybe 5 or 10% of the code. Because all the kind of most of the stuff's already been built. All you need to do is kind of take care of the presentation layer.
Yeah. See, I bucket that to some of the apps that I work with that just require some configuration, because we do that with some of the apps where we make them client specific and we do some branding associated to it, and we're turning and burning those through a lot. So we make them very customer specific and they look like a brand new app. And we also do it in the low code, no code space where we're doing some of those similar things, where we say it's low code, no code, but we still have a development component associated to it, but we're able to minimize the development effort. So similar to that. So yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely see a big rise on some of those components.
Yeah, it seems like it's
So
growing.
that's exciting.
Yeah, it seems like it's growing a lot more. And for anybody who's interested in what codeless apps are, they're just they're systems out there that make it easier for you to create different types of applications and web apps and those types of things without actually needing to have the coding, or like you said, there might be light coding, or at least you can get maybe 75% of the way there, and then you get somebody to code it. And a lot of times these codeless app services, they have coders that can help you if you want to customize
That's
it
right.
even further. Yeah.
The cool thing too is it's like you can have the experience. You can basically build an experience that feels like to your client. It feels like, it feels like some custom application, right? Like it feels like, like you're a software company suddenly, and they don't know necessarily what the back end is. And so yeah, you can present yourself basically like a software company, like kind of a modern solution without needing to, hire a bunch of software developers to actually build you some custom solution to maintain it.
And a good example would be something like a client portal, creating a client portal from some sort of a codeless app or a similar type system. Right.
Right. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee.
We actually
Tom,
create reusable.
Go ahead. Hope didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say we've created reusable components. What we put out there, and we actually helped some of our what we call citizen developers. So some of our business units and business individuals that are more tech savvy, we help them, develop some of the apps to fill gaps to a certain level and put reusable components out there so that they don't have to be so reliant on IT. So we put it in their hands. But let's go answer some questions.
Yeah, there's somebody asked, what are the ways you've driven engagement among the team when implementing a new technology? People like to keep doing what they've always done. The age-old change management question.
Yeah. So we actually, there's a couple of things. One, we've heard over and over again, live training is number one. They still like live training. That's one thing. And also you've got to have upper leadership, really push. Also incentive. Incentives are always key to get adoption of a new technology. And then one of the things that we've also implemented is a tool that's called WalkMe that actually has little sound bites, and it's embedded in the tool, and it takes them through the process and shows them how to do a particular function within the tool. But without the leadership endorsing it and promoting it, also, once again, incentive. Especially if it's sales. I've seen from a sales standpoint, that seems like a tough crowd. No offense, Tom, but that seems like a tough crowd to get them to adopt technology.
Right.
So
yeah, personal observation. The training is huge. So one reason folks don't use a tool or don't use it sometimes to the way that they're kind of expected is, quite frankly, they haven't been given the resource to actually know how to use it, or they've never been, sufficiently trained on it. So it's kind of like, oh, here's the new tool you're going to use. Here's the new process. Go figure it out. So, you should have some training. Make sure you have basically like a training roadmap in place is one piece of advice. Another is, we've done a number of, kind of engagements where we've holistically looked in organizations' technology stack and had them walk through the, kind of the whole process of changing that out. And to the extent that you're able to basically get folks involved earlier in the process and make them feel kind of bought into the decision, that seems to help. So like we had this idea, or in traditional consulting, there's this idea of like the number of interviews you need to have, in order to understand what the root problems are. And then it's like the number of conversations you need to have to like get everybody kind of heard, and brought along for the ride. And so those two numbers are drastically different. You know, what I'd suggest is if you're going to be making sweeping changes, like you should have some mechanism where you can talk to your employees or talk to the folks that are going to be using this and make sure you at least give them an opportunity to voice their concerns or you know, talk about what they want, and then, you know, bring them alive for the decisions. They feel some ownership in it. And then the last thing I'll say, there's an interesting company. I think it's probably, you know, kind of similar to WalkMe, but it was born in and grew up in the staffing industry. It's called Volante, and you know, it's interesting solution. It's like a change management software, and so the idea is, you know, you're kind of building in incentive structures and training and, you know, everything you would need to do kind of a big system change or to actually roll something out. And so that's available for what it is.
Yeah, we've done a lot of
Oh,
change
cool.
management and user adoption over the years with technologies, and all the things that you're talking about. I think incentives are great. I think if you can have contests that encourage people to do it, you got to have visibility also, you know, regularly getting reports out there. Here are the leaderboards, here are the people that are using it, have success stories that you're sharing. The other thing too is, as you're going through the process way before you actually implement, is you need to have subject matter experts internally, ambassadors. And so if you have different branches or markets or things like that, you want to have people that are actually the ambassadors and the subject matter experts there for a couple reasons. One is to help people as you're implementing, but two is to really be the cheerleaders of this change. And then the other thing too is you don't want to make it real easy to revert back to old ways too. And we see that happen a lot where we kind of give people an out to go back to what they're comfortable with. And most of change management is trying to get people to develop new habits and not fall back into the old habits that they have. But love doing incentives, love having visibility, having leaderboards and dashboards and those types of things. I think you were going to say something.
Yeah. And Tom, you shared last year, if people go back in the archives of Staffing World and they have access to the recording, you shared last year in our workshop some technology that had some of the gaming effect, I think it was. And then one more thing that we've done in a couple of areas, we're just launching some new performance management and also some new ways of requisition requests. So hiring managers, especially now, we may not have that many openings just due to tightening our belt a little bit. And then performance management, you may only be doing it 3 to 4 times a year, so you don't go into those tools so much. So one of my team members was actually going, guys, we got to make it simple. You got to make it like an app that you're going on the phone, which brings up a good point. We've got to be designing some of the tools that we have to be that easy and simplistic. So where you can design for that. So that's some of the other pieces that we're doing.
Yeah, I guess there's an element of basically, yeah, it's like there's an element of listening to the folks that are using it to make sure like what you've bought actually makes sense and actually is better, and you know, is better than status quo, right? So certainly if you're implementing some change management or some new technology, you want to make sure that it's getting the results that you expect and they are better than what the status quo is. You don't want to handicap somebody with a new process that is actually making them less productive, right? So
yeah, well, and that's where we're leaning into some of our, what I'll call our citizen developers on the low code, no code space. So we're allowing them to put together needs that they have to fill gaps, and they're bringing those low code, no code solutions to us, and they're kind of half baked, and then they bring them to us and we evaluate them, and then we make them enterprise ready, and then we put them on steroids basically and finish them off and launch them. So that way we're really taking in what the users are really needing on the front line. So it's kind of a new concept that we have that we've taken in.
Yeah, it brings up, David, you kind of touched on it. It brings up one of the big mistakes that we see staffing companies do all the time is they'll introduce a new technology, but it's kind of an add-on. It's not replacing anything. It's not integrated into
Mhm.
processes. It's kind of like it's over here or it's on top of here, but it ends up being extra work for people, or at least perceived extra work, as opposed to actually solving a problem and making it easier.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Easy to
We-
easy to get drawn in to the shiny whistle, and then, yeah.
yeah.
Fair point. One other just I guess comment on the overall separate from adoption, talking about emerging trends. I don't know if this is necessarily emerging, but maybe this is a trend kind of still 5 or 7 years in the making, is just around kind of platforms and the platformization of staffing. We call it the appization of staffing, whatever you want. I think, there was a sense in, kind of the mid 2010s when Upwork was still relatively new, and there was these new kind of on demand platforms coming out, and everybody was posturing like we're going to disrupt the industry. Quite frankly, I mean, that obviously didn't happen, right? Here we are in 2023, and that hasn't happened. And so I think there's maybe, because of that, a little bit of, I don't know if displacency is the right word, but just less kind of concern or less focus on, that category of technology. Although I do think, we're, I don't think that there's going to be wholesale disruption, but I do think that, to the extent that, the staffing kind of staffing company or the staffing process can be redesigned into kind of a more consumer friendly, on demand, always available, digital first experience. I do think that is the future. And so the companies that maybe they're, built that way from the ground up, and they're kind of these new technology first companies that decided to get into staffing, or maybe are staffing companies that have, gotten really savvy with technology and, been able to build, a really great kind of end-to-end experience. But, our hypothesis is that, in the next, 5 years or so, if you looked at like SA's kind of largest 20 staffing companies, a bunch of the companies that are going to be on that list either A, wouldn't necessarily be considered, staffing by kind of how we define it today, or going to be companies that have kind of made that transition. So, and there are more tools out there than kind of ever to do that. But yeah, I think a good example of a company that actually made that transition, or is like Aya Healthcare, for example. Started as a traditional staffing company, still founder led. They now describe themselves as a technology company, and I think you can maybe philosophically argue about are they still a staffing company, or are they a technology company or not, or
Right.
How much of their growth was due to being in a great industry kind of at the right time. But regardless, even comparing to other firms kind of even within their category, you can see that that's been a massive propellant to their growth. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't forget about that kind of area.
Yeah,
even though it hasn't had the wholesale disruption yet. Yeah,
it's a great point. We're actually seeing that more in the healthcare vertical than anywhere. You're seeing a lot of these
that's right.
platform-based travel nurses, and in fact now there's a lot of discussion around, because in a lot of cases they're using independent contractors, 1099s, and is that really the way that it should be? The legality of that and all that. But
Right.
But we are seeing that pretty heavily in that area. I think that COVID actually slowed it down, because going into COVID, Uber was really making strides on creating their staffing division, Uber Works.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
then
I agree.
COVID came along, and Uber, basically got rid of all their divisions except for Uber Eats and Uber Rideshare.
Yeah.
And so I think it would have been a different picture if Uber was probably still in the picture 3 years later here. But to me, that probably was one of the factors that slowed down the adoption and the growth of that. It's still growing. It's growing like crazy, but it's just not the size we think it is. Hope your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely would. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you've got a good point there, David, that That's one to watch. It's probably going to pick up again. Um, I think there's companies out there that are still, even Beeline with joined up,
That's
they
right.
picked
Yeah.
that up. That's a
Yeah.
good one. That's one to watch, I think.
Yeah.
And Tom, I think you're right. I think COVID slowed it down. I think it would have been a different
Yeah.
world if that didn't happen.
But it is one of those where you're seeing the largest ATSs like Bullhorn and Aviante and others that are looking at this
Mhm.
end-to-end platform, mobile based, the mobile's kind of the core of it,
Yeah.
and to go from end to
Yeah.
end. So with different approaches, but we'll see how
Mhm.
it plays out over the next few years. I want to just remind
Yeah.
people again, if you have
I s-
questions. Oh, sorry. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A. We'd love to answer them. If not, we'll keep on talking about the topics that we have. But Hope, go ahead.
yeah. So I think also I think blockchain's still hanging around out there. I think it's still I still hear lots of little rumblings about blockchain. I think some of the projects have kind of slowed down a bit, but I think that's one that still people are interested in having their own identity and their information that they can travel with. Um, and I think that's one that's still going to probably rise in I think a few years and be
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. I've got
I don't know, David. What do you think
I,
about that?
yes and no. I kind of I mostly disagree, but I agree in a couple of key cases. My with blockchain, the big thing I've never been able to grok is like basically most of blockchain. It's a database technology, number one, and its kind of best use case is in facilitating exchange of digital assets or digital money. And so whenever, like during the kind of blockchain heyday, when there was all these like 1,000 different use cases or whatnot, potentially, at the end of the day, it boiled down to like, you need to, transfer some money from one place to another. And so I was like, well, how are we going to build like, what does that have to do with staffing, number one, or work generally? And the second piece that was a little bit tricky was like like the benefit of something like Bitcoin is that it's uncensorable. And so that's normally like one of these things that people brag about, blockchain is so great. It's because it's uncensorable, which basically means like you have to do all this extra work to validate transactions. It turns out that like just being able to validate transactions is actually way more efficient to have, a quote unquote centralized third party do that, because then like if you screw something up, you can easily change it. And you don't need to have all these kind of like redundant resources, et cetera. All that said, there's a couple of use cases, to your point, Hope, which I think are potentially going to be huge. And I don't know like who the winner is here, but one is digital identity. And so, the benefit of having a token or monetary exchange is, if you have a standard by which you're doing like a background check, for example, or a reference check, or you want to get somebody to find out what their credentials are, you could basically, pay that person directly as opposed to, paying some party who's gone out and, just kind of aggregated that information or is doing a new check for you for the first time. So that type of a system could be great. And, the other kind of use case would be, maybe it's just a more evolved version of that is some kind of a LinkedIn killer, which is like, an open LinkedIn, right? Like an open social network where people have their work identity and their work history and their connections, and the token again is just there to kind of lubricate the network. There's an interesting company, again I'm forgetting the name now, but they were actually working with some big corporates, like HCA was one of the early partners, and there was a couple of other organizations that were like invested into it, where they were basically building that out. But even by their partners in mission, it was still like really early stage, and it wasn't really moving the needle. It was more one of those things that they were excited about, and so it kind of invested in and partnered with.
Hey, I want to get to the question. Somebody posted a good question here. Does anyone have experience with the productivity tools that report on where our teams, remote or in office, spend their time? I would love to have greater visibility into where top performers spend most of their time. Who wants to take a run at that? I have thoughts, but I'll defer to you guys first. You're the guests.
Yeah, well, I hope you're living it.
Yeah, I'm living it right now. But this is one that actually we're going to highlight in at Staffing World. So um, we're going to talk about remote workers. That seems to be everybody's concern. And Proto Score is one that we're going to highlight, right, David?
Yeah,
Um,
they're there. They
and
say
that's one that,
the yeah, I
yeah,
think I don't have any direct experience, so I can't
go ahead.
report on like which tool is the best anonymous
Hmm.
attendee.
Right.
So wish I can mention like this
Yeah.
vendor is great and we've seen it like work at X staffing company. I've seen a couple of other solutions that were basically like hacked to be remote and in-person productivity. So one organization basically what they did is they knew which teams were in which locations to begin with because they basically had a bifurcation of like either you're in person or remote. So there wasn't like a real like a daily check-ins like 3 days on, 2 days off or something like that. And they basically looked at they tracked their activity. um they had one of those system trackers so they could see exactly like what people were doing during the day, and then they created some kind of overall efficient like productivity dashboards. And they looked at group A that was in office, group B that was not in office, and use that to, and they could then see that down to like the individual producer level, and so they could see like what one person was doing, what another person was doing, etc.
I think
Yeah.
for me, the performance based, to me, it should all be performance based.
Yeah.
What is the requirement
Yeah.
of the job, and are people doing it? And what do they need to do to get to perform? So if we have a recruiter spot and the goal of that seat is for them to do $10,000 a week in gross profit, then how do we track the different activities that we know predict success to get to that 10,000 a week? And so again, it's about being able to track candidate conversations. It's about being able to track things like phone time, because we know that the people who talk on the phone more make more placements. And we got lots of data that shows that. And so just something as simple as a voice over IP system that can track the length of calls, and also be able to record it so we can listen to the quality of calls and we can coach them and train them and get them better. And then to just have the system, your own ATS can track things like submittals, and then you can start to get into ratios around how many submittals does it take to get a new hire and how do we improve on that. And then, so to me, it doesn't have to be a kind of a fancy, counting keystrokes and counting when the mouse
Yeah.
is moving. It really is, identifying what do we need to have out of each of these positions and how do we track that, and then let them run with it. Let them get there.
I think
Yeah.
that's you're right. The only caveat I would say is people respond to incentives, and so in practice, I can say what's happened. What I've seen a couple of cases where for example, like with sourcers, if the metric that was being tracked was like number of outreaches you're making or number of profiles that you visited and like imported to a database to set up a campaign. What would happen once things started getting tracked, like the expectation was 50, then people would click through really quick just to make sure that they did their 50. And so it's more about like managing to that KPI versus like actually managing to the outcome, which is like we're trying to get good people to convert. So there's a little bit of a balancing act in between the setting up the activities and basically managing towards the outcome that you're actually trying to get. So trying to avoid people looking busy for the sake of looking busy, just to get by, and also actually being productive and working when they're supposed to be working, obviously.
At the end of the day, your payroll people can do all that they want to look busy, but if they don't get payroll done, they didn't do their job, right? And it's the same thing with recruiters. It's the same thing with salespeople. It's the same thing with account managers, with branch managers, with almost everybody in the organization. We have to quantify what does success look like in that role. And then that's what we manage to. We show them the path to get to that success. And that's with the activities and submittals and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to, in order for us to be a viable organization, we need to have certain levels of production for certain positions, and that's what we measure to. Hope, did you have
Yeah.
something to add to that as well?
I 100%. Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, all of us are probably working with teams. So my entire team is remote. And I tell my team, it's not so much about of what you know, I'm looking at all the different various roles that I have, and it's your performance of to that role. They have specific jobs to do, and it may take somebody a few hours. It may take David a couple hours to do a particular task, and Tom, it may take you twice as long, for
Right.
whatever reason. But it's getting the job done. So you've got to measure the individual performance against the task at hand, with that specific role. Some of these tools may help you. Some of the seminars and the coaching and different things may help you. But at the end of the day, you've got to manage the individual against the role.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess
So we
my
got just a few minutes.
final
Go ahead.
comment there is just going to be from all the data we've seen, there tends to be a difference between, behaviors in home or at person. And so, measuring and understanding that's the first step towards, making better decisions and intervening where it might be necessary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
We've got just a few minutes left. I want to get to a topic that may take the rest of the time on this. We touched on it a little bit. Is AI going to replace recruiters? That's the question I get all the time. I actually wrote an article about this for ASA that came out a couple months ago, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I suspect so. With AI, so AI is, first of all, I guess there's a clarifying point, which is that AI has been around for a long time, right? So I suspect what you're asking there is the new kind of generation of AI, which basically can, mimic human intelligence and creativity to a pretty surprising extent. Is that going to replace recruiters? I suspect I don't know. I think the answer is still no, with some caveats. I think the role is probably going to change significantly. First of all, in kind of like in writing, first of all, let's just look historically, what impact has AI had already? Technically you can, before, OpenAI released its, language model, ChatGPT and, to the world in January, you could do AI-based matching already. You could have a conversational interface. You could basically do rediscovery already, and that hadn't, if it might have been an additive to recruiters, but it didn't replace them. Today, I guess the difference is I was just on a demo yesterday with a company that can, basically built a live conversation. It's like Converse AI, it's called HeyMilo, but they're doing an interview, and they're using a large language model, A, to create the interview itself, B, to create a scoring rubric for that interview, C, to actually conduct the interview with in a voice interaction, and then to come back with a recorded transcription of the interview, along with their assessment of the candidate based on, the answers that they gave, right? So that's an entirely kind of automated, interview process. So, something that normally a sourcer probably would be doing. There's still an element, I think, of, even in the world where that kind of capability is, that particular product was still pretty, the one I saw yesterday was still pretty rough because it's early stage, 2 guys in a garage, basically, or an accelerator in Toronto. But you could see kind of the future of the writing on the wall, so to speak. I think even in that world, relationship building is still incredibly important. And so maybe people are going to develop deep relationships with AIs. I doubt it. I think that human connection still matters a lot. Deep expertise in particular areas is still really important. Selling is still really important. And so, I think the role of recruiters will change significantly, and there might be some adverse impact. I suspect a lot of organizations will think why don't we just use ChatGPT instead of hiring, a bunch of new recruiters? That will be maybe the gut reaction from executives. But in practice, like other kind of technology innovations that have come before, there will be a fair amount of displacement, but fundamentally, I don't think the role is going away. It's just going to change.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. I don't think the role will go away. I do think they will use it as a tool, similar to like somewhat what David said. They're going to use it to, write job descriptions or sharpen the job description. So take that out of the equation. Redo resumes if they need to have resumes. In the future, I don't think the resumes are going to matter. I think they're going to evolve from resumes. That's my prediction, that resumes are going to change, or you're not going to need them as much. But I don't think the role will totally go away in the future.
yeah.
It should
my answer
complement
to
it. So, similar to it. Yep. Go
yeah,
ahead.
my answer to it has always been that if you're doing administrative, just task oriented activities, if you're doing things that are repetitive, if you're doing keyword searches on job boards, if you're sending out emails and texts, and that's all you're doing, those things are going to get replaced. They're already being replaced. If you are a recruiter that is building relationships, that is getting out there, talking to people, building pools of talent, that is focused on matching up talent to positions and really trying to find the best fit, AI is just going to continue to enhance, and it's going to enable you to grow and to scale. And so I look at it, David, you said earlier that you thought AI was going to be as transformative as the internet. And I think it's a good analogy. I think of it even as, if you think about the calculator, or about the word processor, the computer, where we've had this transformative technology that changes the way that not only we work, but the way we live. And the internet is a great example of that. This is that next generation of that.
That's right. And like in the early days of the internet, like you didn't know, like if you would have thought like in 1998, if you would have said like, oh, like you would have talked about like what are the world's biggest businesses and the revenue model that they would have, it would be like who could have predicted, right? Like
right.
So I think a lot of like that transformation is yet to come. One last point I'll make, I guess, on the AI thing is, have the benefit of I know a small staffing company that had a pretty technical co-founder, and so they actually used an open source language model and built an application to do basically Gen AI internally across their entire business. And for what it's worth, they didn't go out and lay a bunch of people off. They used it as basically an additional matching tool and then an invite to apply. So and the biggest impact was that their sourcers, normally they had like a 6-month ramping period for their sourcers before like a source would ever be able to talk to a candidate, and it like basically shortened that to 1 week. So the tool up-leveled the sourcers to kind of become technical experts in the roles. It was an IT staffing company. And so it enabled their sourcers to be able to start like reaching out to candidates with without like manager approval or intervention within a week. So it was more of a productivity boost rather than they went and laid a bunch of people off.
And that's what it's all about. It's not going to replace people. It's just going to create new opportunities, and it's going to allow people to focus on the more value add part of their jobs. So I think it's a great example. So we are at the end of our time. I want to thank you both. Thank you. We could talk for another couple hours if we had the time to do this. But thank you very much. I did want to let people, if you miss any of our past episodes or want to revisit them, you can find recordings of our discussion on popular podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to sign up for our next live panel cast discussion, which is in, I don't have the date right here, but it's Tuesday in November, where we'll be discussing the latest trends in compliance. You can sign up for the next Staffing in Sync, as well as access to the video library of our past sessions on our website, staffinginsync.com. Staffing in Sync is produced and sponsored by SyncStream Solutions, the top provider of Affordable Care Act compliance for the staffing industry. and Essential Staff Care, the largest provider of health insurance and benefits to the staffing industry. So thank you very much to those two organizations. Thank you for your support. Hope you had a good session. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you both for being part of this. Great discussion, and everybody have a great week.
Good times. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.